The day I bought a lake for $4,800, I thought I was the luckiest man in Tennessee. The day after that, I thought I was going to jail. My name is Cole Mitchell, and until 6 months ago, I was just a guy with a decent job, a small house on a quarter-acre lot, and a burning desire for something more. I grew up fishing with my grandpa on Center Hill Lake, and ever since he passed, I dreamed of having my own piece of waterfront. But in this economy, a retired mechanic doesn't just buy lakefront property. Not unless he wins the lottery. Turns out, I didn't need to win the lottery. I just needed to read the fine print. It started with a random email from the county tax assessor's office. A notice about a public auction for tax-delinquent properties. I almost deleted it, but something made me click. I scrolled through pages of abandoned lots and rundown houses until I saw it. Parcel #8872J, unimproved wetlands/lake access. Minimum bid, $4,800. The address placed it at the very end of Lakeshore Drive, a fancy neighborhood in a planned community called Hidden Cove Estates. I knew the area. Big houses, manicured lawns, and the kind of people who complained if your grass was half an inch too long. But this parcel wasn't a house. It was a plot of land described as riparian access to a small, spring-fed lake that sat at the back of the entire development. I drove out there that afternoon. Hidden Cove Estates was everything I expected. Gates, security cameras, perfectly painted mailboxes. But the lake? The lake was stunning. It was maybe 20 acres of the clearest water I'd ever seen, surrounded by woods on 3 sides and the backyards of the mansions on the 4th. And at the far end, tucked away behind a tangle of overgrown brush and no trespassing signs, was my parcel. It was a mess, just a muddy bank and a crumbling stone foundation from some old structure, but the water lapped right up to it. According to the county map, this little slice of heaven was legally separate from the gated community. It had been owned by an old fishing club that dissolved in the 1980s, and the taxes hadn't been paid in 30 years. I bid online. I won. 2 weeks later, I had a deed in my hand that said I, Cole Mitchell, owned a lake in the middle of an HOA's backyard. I should have known it was too good to be true. I decided to check out my new property on a Saturday morning. I parked my old F-150 on the public access road that ran along the backside of the development. There was no gate back there, just a rusted barbed wire fence marking the boundary. I brought a pair of bolt cutters, a fishing pole, and a 6-pack of cheap beer. I was going to have myself a day. I cut the wire, pushed through the brush, and emerged onto my muddy bank. The sun was warm, the water was still, and for the first time in years I felt like I actually owned something that mattered. I cast my line, cracked a beer, and leaned back against the old stone foundation. Bliss. Pure bliss. It lasted about 45 minutes. Excuse me. What do you think you're doing? I turned to see a woman power walking along the edge of the water from the direction of the mansions. She was in her late 50s with highlighted blonde hair, a sun visor, and a floral athleisure outfit that probably cost more than my truck. Her face was the color of a ripe tomato and not from the sun. I stood up, wiping my hands on my jeans. Afternoon, ma'am. Just doing a little fishing. Her eyes went wide. Fishing? This is a private lake. This is Hidden Cove Estates property. You're trespassing. I pulled the folded deed from my back pocket. I brought it on purpose, half expecting something like this. Actually, ma'am, according to this, I own this parcel. See? Parcel #8872J. Riparian rights. This bank and the water access belong to me. She snatched the paper from my hand, her eyes scanning it furiously. Her face went from tomato to beetroot. This is a mistake. This is clearly a mistake. This lake has belonged to the Hidden Cove HOA for 40 years. We maintain it. We stock it. Our dues pay for it. I took the deed back gently. I'm not saying you don't use it. I'm just saying the land under it and the access point right here? That's mine. County records are pretty clear. She stared at me like I'd just grown a second head. Then she pointed a trembling finger at me. You stay right there. You do not move. I am calling the sheriff. Oh, come on, that's not Nices. But she was already marching back toward her house, phone pressed to her ear. Her name, I would later learn, was Karen Patterson. And she was the unofficial queen of Hidden Cove Estates. President of the HOA for 12 years. Chair of the Architectural Review Committee. The woman who once threw a fit because a neighbor's Halloween decorations were too gauche. She was a Karen in the truest, most biblical sense of the word. 20 minutes later, a sheriff's deputy pulled up in a cruiser, lights flashing. Deputy Miller was a weary-looking man with a gray mustache and the expression of someone who has seen it all. He walked down to the bank, glanced at me, then at Karen, who was now flanked by 3 other neighbors in matching outrage. All right, he said. What's the problem? This man, Karen shrieked, pointing at me, broke our fence. He's trespassing on HOA property. He's fishing in our lake. I want him arrested. Deputy Miller looked at me. Sir? I handed him the deed. He read it slowly, then looked at the county map on his phone. He read it again. He sighed a deep, tired sigh. Ma'am, he said, turning to Karen. According to this parcel was sold at a tax auction. This gentleman is the legal owner. The fence he cut was on his property, not yours. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish. That's impossible. That land belongs to the HOA. We've always had access. Our deeds say we have lake access. Deputy Miller shrugged. Your deeds might say you have access to the lake, but they don't say you own the lake. This parcel was never part of the original HOA plat. It's a separate entity. Looks like an old fishing club owned it, and the taxes went unpaid. Now he owns it. That's a mistake. A clerical error. You can't just let him. Ma'am, I'm not a real estate lawyer. I'm a cop. And right now I don't see a crime. He's on his own land, fishing in water that abuts his land. That's not trespassing. He handed the deed back to me. Sir, you might want to get a lawyer to sort out the access rights. But for now you're fine. Karen looked like she was about to explode. I'm calling the HOA lawyer. I'm calling the county commissioner. I'm calling everyone. Deputy Miller tipped his hat to me. Have a good day, sir. Ma'am. And he walked back to his cruiser. As he drove away, Karen turned to me, her eyes blazing with pure, unfiltered malice. You haven't heard the last of this. You think you can just waltz in here and steal our lake? We'll see about that. She and her posse marched back to their mansions. I sat back down, my heart pounding. I tried to fish, but the piece was gone. I'd won the first round, but I had a feeling the war was just beginning. The next day was Sunday. I was at home drinking coffee and wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake when my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Mr. Mitchell, this is Derek from Channel 4 News. We'd like to get your comment on the lake dispute in Hidden Cove Estates. Please call me back. I stared at my phone. Lake dispute? How did the news know? I turned on my TV and flipped to the local news. And there she was. Karen Patterson, standing in front of her $1 million home, talking to a reporter. The cheer-in read, HOA president fights back against land grabber. This man, Karen said, her voice trembling with manufactured outrage, cut our fence, trespassed on our community lake and now claims he owns it. Our families have enjoyed this lake for generations. Our property values depend on it. This is an outrage and we will fight it with every tool we have. The reporter turned to the camera. The Hidden Cove Homeowners Association claims the tax sale was a mistake and that the property in question has always been part of the community's common areas. The new owner, Cole Mitchell, could not be reached for comment. I felt sick. They'd made me look like a villain. A land grabber. A thief. And then my phone rang again. And again. And again. Local news. Radio stations. A blogger who called himself HOA Watchdog. By noon, my face was all over the internet. The comments were brutal. Typical vulture. He's just trying to shake them down. Burn his house down. I called a lawyer. A real one. Her name was Anita Reyes and she specialized in property disputes. She listened to my story, looked at my deed and chuckled. Mr. Mitchell, she said, you have what's called a quiet title action on your hands. The HOA is going to sue you. They're going to claim adverse possession, prescriptive easement, everything in the book. But here's the thing, they have to prove they own it. And you have a deed. A clean, county-issued deed from a legal tax sale. The burden of proof is on them. But they've got money. They've got lawyers. I'm just a guy. That's true, she said. But you've got something they don't, a valid deed and the law on your side. And after that little performance on TV, you've also got public sympathy. Nobody likes a bully, Mr. Mitchell. Even a rich bully. The next morning my phone rang again. But this time it wasn't a reporter. It was a man named Richard Whitmore. Mr. Mitchell, he said. My name is Dick Whitmore. I'm a retired real estate attorney, and I've lived in Hidden Cove Estates for 23 years. I braced myself for another attack. Mr. Whitmore, if this is about the lake. It is, he interrupted. But not in the way you think. I saw Karen on the news last night. I've known Karen for 2 decades. She's a bully and she's wrong. I pulled the original plat maps from when the development was built in 1978. That parcel you bought? It was never part of the HOA. The developer tried to buy it from the fishing club but they wouldn't sell. So he built around it. For 40 years the HOA has been using it illegally, just hoping no one would notice. I was stunned. You're on my side? He laughed. Son, I'm on the side of the truth. And the truth is you own that land. But more importantly, I'm not the only one who feels this way. There are a lot of us in the neighborhood who are tired of Karen's dictatorship. She's been running this place like her personal fiefdom for too long. This lake thing? It's the last straw. You told me about the years of petty tyranny. The fines for wrong-colored mailboxes. The lawsuits against neighbors who dared to disagree with her. The embezzlement rumors that never quite got proven. The way she bullied the previous HOA board into submission. Mr. Mitchell, he said, I'm going to help you. Pro bono. And I'm going to bring some friends. 2 days later, I drove back to Hidden Cove Estates. But this time I went through the front gate. Dick Whitmore had arranged a meeting at the community clubhouse. He said it was important. When I walked in, I expected to face a hostile crowd. Instead, I found about 40 people sitting in folding chairs, drinking coffee and eating donuts. They weren't hostile. They were smiling. Some even clapped. Dick stood up. Folks, this is Cole Mitchell, the man who bought our lake. An elderly woman in the front row raised her hand. Young man, I've lived here for 30 years. I've watched Karen Patterson tell my children they couldn't play near her lake. She's acted like she owns the place. It's about time someone showed up who actually does. The room erupted in laughter. Over the next hour, I heard story after story. Karen's reign of terror. The unfair fines. The selective enforcement. The time she called the cops on a teenager for having a lemonade stand. By the end, I wasn't the villain anymore. I was the hero. Dick stood up again. Here's the thing, everyone. Cole owns that lake. The access point is on his land. Legally, he could fence it off and none of us would ever see it again. He could sell it to a developer who'd build condos. He could do a lot of things. But he's not Karen. He's reasonable. I stood up, feeling nervous. Look, I didn't buy this lake to cause trouble. I bought it because I love fishing. I grew up on lakes like this. I don't want to take anything away from you folks. I just want to enjoy my property without being called a criminal. A man in the back shouted, "What do you want?" I thought about it. Honestly, I want to build a small cabin. Nothing fancy. A dock. Maybe a little boat. I want to fish. And I want to do it without being harassed. Dick nodded. That's more than reasonable. And here's what I propose. Cole grants the HOA a permanent, irrevocable easement to use the lake for non-commercial recreational purposes. Swimming, fishing, kayaking. The whole neighborhood keeps their access. In exchange, the HOA drops any claim to the land, pays for a new shared fence, and we have a little chat about the HOA presidency. The next HOA board meeting was, by all accounts, legendary. Karen arrived with her usual entourage, expecting to lead the charge against me. Instead, she found herself facing a packed room of her own neighbors, all holding printed copies of my proposed easement agreement. Dick Whitmore ran the meeting. He laid out the facts. I owned the lake. The HOA had no legal claim. I was offering them continued access for free. All they had to do was accept it and move on. Karen stood up, sputtering. This is extortion. You can't just. Sit down, Karen, someone shouted. For once in your life, shut up, yelled another. The vote was called. The motion to accept my easement and drop all claims passed 47-3. Karen and her two loyalists were the only dissenting votes. And then came the second motion, removal of Karen Patterson as HOA president and board member. That one passed unanimously. She stormed out, screaming about lawsuits, but we never heard from her again. Last I heard, she sold her house and moved to Florida. Today, I'm sitting on the porch of my new cabin, looking out at the lake. It's a small place, just 2 bedrooms, a great room and a wraparound deck. But it's mine. The dock is in the water. My boat is tied up. And every now and then, a neighbor paddles by in waves. The kids from Hidden Cove swim here now. They have picnics on the bank. They fish off my dock. And I don't mind one bit. Because they're not trespassing. They're guests. The HOA still exists, but it's run by reasonable people now. Dick Whitmore is the president. They send me polite emails about lake maintenance and I send them polite emails back. Sometimes they even ask my permission before doing things, which is a nice change. As for Karen, she tried to sue. She claimed emotional distress. The judge threw it out so fast it made my head spin. The last I heard, she was trying to start a neighborhood watch in her gated community in Naples. I'm sure she's making someone's life miserable. I take a sip of my lemonade and cast my line into the water. The sun is warm, the fish are biting, and life is good. All because I bought a lake for $4,800 and a Karen called 911. Sometimes, the American dream just falls into your lap. Or in my case, floats right up to your shore. The moral of the story? Never underestimate the power of a tax auction. And never, ever let a Karen ruin your day. Because the next day everything can change.